I think you need to partner with a good platform that can do a lot of the work for you. The only way to get something like that implemented as a team of one is minimal lift and
Mhm.
making the implementation as easy as possible.
Hello, and welcome to the All Onboard podcast, your go-to resource for all things related to employee onboarding. I'm your host, Thomas Kunjappu, founder and CEO of Cleary. Today, I am super excited to welcome Sahar Naim, an experienced people and operations leader who manage onboarding programs at high-growth startups and consumer companies, including most recently BetterHelp. Sahar brings a wealth of knowledge in setting employees up for success from day one, especially in a high growth environment. So, welcome to the show, Sahar.
Thanks for having me, Thomas. I'm excited to be here.
So, just to kick things off, could you tell me a little bit about the kinds of onboarding processes you've been a part of or been involved with in your career?
Yeah, so over the last 8 years in my people leader experience, I've managed onboarding programs end to end for high growth companies, as you mentioned, including BetterHelp. I've personally onboarded over 400 people and probably another 100 people that I've overseen get onboarded through members of my team. Prior to that, I was an EA, and I've always had a bit of a dotted line to HR and an active role in onboarding. I enjoyed sitting at the front desk and being that face of the company. I got to welcome new hires and be their point of contact if they needed anything in their first 30, 60, 90 days.
That's really interesting, that connection between EA experience and going into operational and HR leadership experience. There's so much crossover, and I see that career pathway happening over and over again for folks. I know you've worked with teams of dramatically different sizes, right? Including a 5-person startup versus hundreds of folks that you're onboarding. What do you actually need? What are the bare bones? What do you need for onboarding in a 5-person startup? What's different when you're really scaling that program up?
So, fun fact is, I'm actually consulting with a 5-person startup right now. So, I can really speak to that. It's really like for a 5-person startup, a lot of it is people they've worked with before. So, there isn't a need for a super robust onboarding program. It's really just the meat of what they need to know. Things like the HR tools that are being used, payroll dates, and compliance things we need to pay attention to, their tools that they need access to, that sort of thing. It's very bare minimum because these people have worked together previously. It's mostly referral based. That's what I envision for the 5-person startup and what I've been working on right now. When you start to grow and start to do outside recruiting, that you really need to start building out the program to be a bit more robust. And I like to put a big emphasis on the white glove experience. When you are recruiting people from the outside, they don't know you, they don't know me, they don't know the founders. So they really need to be shown how well they'll be treated while they're at the company.
Can you tell me, what does that look like? When do you transition? What are the signals to do something more formal? Obviously, you need to do the paperwork for any employee that you're hiring in as a W-2 worker for the company, and it's part of the job. But when you say the word program, we're both thinking about something broader than that. What are the signals for you to invest in that? Anything beyond just making sure paperwork is in place?
As soon as you start recruiting from the outside, you're putting employees through the recruiting process, which should have a white glove experience. And then when you're bringing them on board, and if they don't know people there, implementing something like the buddy program, that's one of my favorite components of an onboarding program. And doing things like you need to focus on department specific onboarding. So, taking engineering as an example for that, you would want to build out a shadowing program. You got to get everyone into the acronyms that are being used at the company and just building something that's just more robust other than just the tools, like really personalizing the onboarding experience.
You're talking about departmental onboardings. That's actually even more important when you're getting to employee 10, 20, 30. That early scale up, especially for tech companies. You're hiring engineers, and you need to have an effective onboarding program into the code base, understanding best practices and code reviews. That's a part of onboarding too, right? It's not just the cultural onboarding that's important. You've seen different examples of onboarding programs, some that work well, some that don't. What makes something effective? Do you have examples of things that were not working versus were working?
In my role, it's kind of unique because they hire me to do all the operations and people for these companies. When I'm walking into a company where there is no onboarding in place, I'm getting things set up. Working with first time founders, sometimes there's an element of trust that needs to be built because things like giving me access to sensitive information, cap tables, that sort of thing is something that's first time founders hold near and dear. I've had those experiences where it's been a little bit of a challenge getting access to those types of things. But once I get it, then I'm able to really build out the program and incorporate all of the things that I was missing from when I walked into the door. And I've been at companies who have done onboarding really well. One company in particular was called Branch Metrics. Branch was a very people first company. I was a people ops manager there, and they had their onboarding program built out. It was probably the best that I've ever seen. And it's where I learned best practices for onboarding. Some of those things that they had going on there was manager training. The founders would write a personalized note in a book. So it was the growth mindset book that they used to give to people. So just really setting that tone to just have a growth mindset coming into it. The personalized note was really important. I was really impressed that the founders continued that practice, even though we had onboarding classes of 10 to 20 people. The founders would sit down and write it out, just having those regular check ins, those feedbacks. It was closing the loop with the new hire. And that was really important and something that I've implemented in my.
Hey, it's Thomas here. Hope you're enjoying the episode so far. Are you curious to see how your onboarding program stacks up against the industry's best? Check out Cleary's latest onboarding assessment tool. It offers in-depth analysis and customized recommendations to enhance every aspect of your employee onboarding, from pre-boarding to company culture integration and more. Whether you're just setting up your onboarding program or you're a CHRO at a Fortune 100 company, this assessment can improve your onboarding know-how. Check it out at gocleary.com/onboarding-assessment. Again, that's gocleary.com/onboarding-assessment. You can also find the link in the episode notes. Now back to the show. As you were talking about Branch and having a mature onboarding program in place, there are many things you need to figure out if you're at the ground level and have your first HR person hired. You're still thinking about sales, marketing, product market fit, getting the first set of junior hires productive with the first person doing that type of role. Some of these things like manager training might come in a little bit later on in the game, but that example you gave of just founders writing a personalized note, that is something that can be useful from day one and can continue scaling for some time. That brings up this broader topic of people operations, or in people roles, you're partially coaching managers or a leadership team, but there's some unique challenges if you're coaching founders. And I think a subcategory within that, you're talking about first time founders. There may be some folks working with founders even at a more mature company. And of course, people evolve over time. But what are some lessons you've taken away from your career in creating an onboarding program while effectively working with the founders?
I'll say that it's actually gotten easier now that I've built out the experience. Earlier in my career, it was really trust building. That was really important, explaining the why to them. I think founders just need to know why, right? They need the data. They need to trust you to push this program forward so that once you develop that trust and you show them results, they are more inclined to invest in HR programs, which, as we both know, there isn't always a big portion of the budget carved out for people programs. An onboarding tool would be helpful, like Cleary. If I had Cleary for my previous companies, it would have been very helpful because just the automation of it, especially when you're looking at high growth and you're managing 1,000 different things at once. To get something like that, you need to show the first time founder, hey, this is worth it. And here's why. Here's how much time I'm spending on X, Y, and Z within the onboarding process. Here's how much time I can save. And here's how you can utilize me in another space. They want to hear about the time spent, the dollars, the investment, and the ROI.
So tell me a little bit more about that, because I think a lot of our listeners might be in, if not exactly the same situation, somewhat similar, where there is at least some qualitative evidence or some thoughts about, hey, we want to really invest in our onboarding program. We have either a very leaky bucket, which we absolutely know about, or just compared to other places that I've been as an HR or people ops leader, I've seen that we are not up to par. There's that spark. You want to invest. And of course, you're met with, if not a skeptical, at least an open leadership team. Talk me through that. What do you do to go from saying, okay, I have this idea to getting some investment in an onboarding program?
Retention is a big thing that I hone in on with the founders because when they're bringing me on, we don't really have a full recruiting function, right? So some of them are relying on outside agencies to do recruiting for them. As you are aware, that's a very costly way of bringing talent on, especially here in the Valley, where all my experience comes from. The engineering salaries, we're competing with the FANG companies, and you're barely able to keep up. So when you're paying a premium of 20 to 30% to the recruiting company, that stands out to the founders. If you're having a revolving door of people coming in and out, your recruiting costs are going to go up significantly, not to mention the fatigue on early employees responsible for training these people. So if you got your and second engineer constantly spinning their wheels on training new employees, but then those employees are leaving, it's just not a good experience for anyone. It's not cost effective by any means. And when I share this information with the first time founder, it gives them a different perspective. Onboarding goes hand in hand with retention. If you have a really good, solid onboarding program, it sets the tone for the employee to have a really positive experience. When employees start at a company, they're so excited. That is when you need to capitalize on their excitement and show them, hey, we've really got our stuff together here. We're going to train you. We're going to give you the tools that you need to do your job. We're going to give you the FaceTime with the leadership team as needed. An employee will know if things feel like they're falling through the cracks, things are not organized. It sends a message that the organization is not organized. For some people, that's a big warning sign. I've seen some companies have a problem with people leaving a lot. That goes back to the cost of rehiring them. I think I've seen something like hiring an employee is 3 times the cost of their salary. So when you tell a first time founder that who's strapped for cash and who needs to report to their board, that's going to be a very important conversation to have with them.
Especially if it's right off of the back of a painful loss of potentially productive employee within 3 to 6 months of the hire. The cost is just net negative, and you're looking at putting that investment into recruiting yet again.
Yeah.
Um, I guess you have data from companies overall that you're bringing to bear about any kind of investment beyond just recruiting. So let's talk a little bit about the scale then. We're going beyond just a couple of people, but we're in this phase of rapid growth. There's usually an understanding that we're going to be spending a lot on recruiting, and the company is going to look very different in a year from now if we are successful. Going to be full of new people. There's a lot we need to do. There's clearly investment needed here. How do you think about onboarding programs at rapid scale? And how is that different? What are the most important things to invest in from your perspective?
Automation is the number one important thing because usually when these companies are going into rapid scale, there isn't a huge investment in the ops team. I'm a team of one and I'm wearing all the hats, right? When you're looking at scale, automation is really important. Going back to my experience at Branch, for example, they had Zaps built into everything using Zapier. I loved that, but it takes a lot of effort to get that all fully set up. But it was awesome because like you would plug in an employee's start date and a series of events would populate on the calendar and all these things would happen versus when you're a team of one like me, you don't always have the bandwidth to take care of all these different things. So, in order to be set up for success and to really have that emphasis on a good onboarding program, automation is really important. And then, obviously, scaling your team to make sure that you do have the resources to support the organization as a whole. Another great example is BetterHelp. When I started, we were probably about 170 employees. We added over like 100 employees. And then I was also responsible for onboarding our entire contingent workforce. So what started with 5 people grew to almost 200 people. So in theory, I managed an organization of about 500 people because they were obviously not as robust onboarding for contractors, but there was an element of onboarding for them. as well. Building out the team was really important for me. And I still had a pretty lean team, all things considered. There were two gals doing it, one people experience, one HR, and then one in IT. It was a team of three people, but they were a power team. They were awesome and they were able to get everybody onboarded. Circling back to that automation, I can't say that enough. Building out your team and making sure you're set up for success.
If you are thinking about automation, people get caught up in this catch 22 of more demand for support work and operational work than we have bandwidth for. We don't have the time to invest proactively in tooling, processes, or something internally that will set us up for the next quarter or beyond. How do you break that negative feedback loop where you're constantly in reactive mode, especially when it's a team of one wearing many hats? It's hard to stay organized, much less get ahead of the curve with further investment.
It's a really interesting one because I ran into this even at BetterHelp where I was trying to build out some automations, but didn't have the time. This was even managing a team of 9 people total. I think you need to partner with a good platform that can do a lot of work for you. The only way to get something like that implemented as a team of one is minimal lift and
Mhm.
making the implementation as easy as possible. Hopefully, they have a spreadsheet with all aspects of their onboarding built out. And that's something you could just simply send over to the platform and they can help build it based on that. And then it's like minimal 1 to 2 hours a week for building out any automations. The initial time investment is a lot, but if you have a good partner that can support you, the payoff is significant because I would have loved to just plug in a date and have that cascade into all the different things that I needed to be done. When you have limited resources, it's hard. And when you reach a bigger company too, it's actually harder. And part of the reason why we didn't try to change a lot of the programs at BetterHelp prior was because of all of the approval processes that come with bigger companies. So when you're a company like BetterHelp, privacy and security is such a huge thing. The process of getting a new tool onboarded, it was a little painful, right? Because it was such a big emphasis on that. Whereas if it's a smaller company, you have less hurdles. Security is, even at this startup that I'm helping right now, security is number one priority, but it's a little bit less layers of things to go through in order to bring a tool on.
Uh, that ends up becoming one of the enduring competitive advantages of smaller companies, less red tape. The way you described moving a spreadsheet into a more automated process, it's so funny that so much describes what we do often with our clients who use the Cleary Journeys product, which is all about employee onboarding. Even before the automation step itself, there's a need to think about the process at the higher level, ensure there's investment and alignment across the company to get the investment you need, whether it's with tooling or sometimes it's with personnel or changing a process which maybe needs to be cross functional. It's so tough to get out of that reactive mode once you're in there. But even recognizing that's where you are, I think is important, right? Um, Going all the way to the other side from reactive mode to what you talked about before, which is your approach to provide a white glove, hands on approach towards onboarding for every new employee. You're working at extremely small scale and really making sure it's personalized. Could you tell me more about that? What does that mean to you? A white glove service with onboarding, and why is that important?
White glove experience is a very welcoming experience. From day one, there's the energy, the enthusiasm, the celebration emoji in the email subject line, welcome to the team, and it's making sure that they have all the information they need. The pre-boarding is really important, a lot of enthusiasm, and then fast forwarding to on their first day. I love to bring the energy. It's hard because it's like a Monday morning at 9 a.m. So I have to have a few coffees, but it's something I've always prioritized. The startup I was at before BetterHelp, I was there and we were in person when I first started. Then COVID happened 6 weeks after I started. So we had to transition into a remote environment and me doing remote onboarding, which I didn't actually have experience. I'm one of those few people that very much enjoys being in an office. Remote was a bit challenging for me, but I would welcome the employee and then it was like, I'd give them a little intro. I would loosen them up a little bit, which they would share some fun facts about me. And then we would do virtual confetti and just bring all the energy, which they're probably like, wow, what is this? How many coffees has this girl had? But it was always the energy I needed to bring because they just made them feel happy. And that was the feedback that I would always get is I was feeding off of your energy. So even if I'm having a bad day, let's say I had a bad weekend, I didn't care. The moment that screen turned on and my new hire was on the screen, it was like bringing all of that energy over to them.
So a lot of white glove service is about bringing that positive energy to people so in a way that they can feel it. You started talking about an important topic, which is when remote is a completely different ball game and how that transition. You said it was tough for you personally, but the whole company transitioned as many of us did. How did that go?
Yeah. Yeah. So the reason why it was difficult for me was because I love in person interaction where I'm welcoming them from the elevator, the front desk. I'm walking over, talking to them, that small talk that would be happening to the coffee machine and getting them settled in. I'm all about the presentation. So I love the first day, like you see their desk and it's all set up all nice. There's a welcome card and all those things. When it's virtual, you can't do that. So you had to solve for how do you make the box look really amazing, right? How do you incorporate that personalized touch when everything is virtual? I think I saw that in a good way, staying on top of handwritten notes go a really long way, albeit it's a little hard when you're doing 10 at the same time. But then I would always channel my branch founders and say, if they could write a note in a book for that many people, I can write it for this many people. There were just like little nuance things like that. I'm a really good person in person, but I've learned to adjust on how to do these things virtually.
That's fascinating. So you're almost analyzing yourself and what brings you that energy and feeling of connection that you are doing in person, and how can you do your best to replicate that when remote. People do feel that in the experience more broadly. Maybe one last question. We've talked a little bit about how onboarding can be different in different ways, right? We just now remote versus in person, different scales. And then we broadly touched on departmental onboarding, depending on the different types of departments and what's needed there. Do you believe that the onboarding process overall for companies of any scale is owned primarily by one particular department or person?
No, it's the leadership team. They're a huge stakeholder for a lot of reasons. It's the leadership team that are stakeholders. It's obviously the HR/ops team, as well as the manager of the employee. I think all of those people collectively are responsible for the onboarding program.
Which makes it challenging because it's a shared responsibility with shared outcomes.
It is, but I think you have a good relationship with the leadership team. They'll recognize that shared responsibility and support you.
Got it. Thank you. Are you ready now, Sahar, to move into our lightning round?
Yeah, sure.
First of all, as a way to get to know you, tell me about your favorite holiday.
My favorite holiday is Halloween. I love getting into it. I love seeing my kids get super into it. I love costumes.
What was your costume for last Halloween?
I'm typically a cat because it's very easy. I'm always throwing parties at the companies that I'm at. We always go really big for Halloween, mostly because it's my favorite holiday. It's a great culture building holiday, I would think. So the cat is just the easiest thing when you're rushing to work at 7 a.m. But my favorite costume that I actually won an award for was Flo, the progressive girl, the insurance girl.
Very specific, but yet recognizable. Interesting. So, could you tell me a bit about what you enjoy most about the work that you do right now?
I get to work with people. And the thing that I love about my job is that I directly impact how people feel. I take that as a big responsibility, which is partly why I'm so big on bringing the energy. I want to make sure that when somebody leaves a meeting or an experience with me, they leave with positive feeling.
Hey, it's Thomas here. Now, you and I might think it's obvious that people are your biggest resource, and investing in your onboarding program to make it world class is a bet you want to make. But how do you talk about this with your CEO or CFO so that you can get them on board with investing in an updated onboarding program? They're always looking for something that can save money and boost productivity at the same time. Well, I've got something exciting for you. Check out Cleary's onboarding ROI calculator. It's easy to use. Just enter some info about your current onboarding process and your company and see how much time and money you could be saving with a modern onboarding solution. Head on over to gocleary.com/onboarding-ROI to give it a try. see what you learn, and let us know what you think. Again, that's gocleary.com/onboarding-ROI. You can also find a link in the episode notes. Now, back to the show.
Tell me about what translates and what does not translate from an EA role to a broader people operations role.
What translates is how to speak to executives, right? Executives love bullet points and don't give me a lot of fluff. I learned that from being an EA. Also, calendar management, there is a lot of overlap, making sure the onboarding meetings you're putting on people's calendars all look good, it's organized, and organization as a whole. Like to be an EA, when I was an EA, I was supporting C-level. So in order to be successful, I had to be very organized, and time management was really big. So taking that into a team of one life, if you're managing 5 different jobs, you need to be very organized with how you're spending your time in order to fulfill that role and to be present for all of the different areas of the organization. When you go from supporting an executive to being an executive, it's an interesting transition. You look at your calendar, you're like, oh, that's not somebody else's calendar. That's actually my calendar where I'm in back-to-back meetings all day long. That's an interesting one. You're not managing someone else's calendar, it's yours. And also being responsible for the work that you are overseeing for that function.
So for a new hire that comes in, should the first 2 weeks of their calendar be completely booked up and preordained?
I'm a big fan of putting things on their calendars, but self-study blocks. I hesitate because some people might say it's a little micromanagey. It's not micromanagey, but I like to put everything on their first week schedule on their calendar. It's not just back to back meetings with people. I do build in breaks. I do build in like lunch. I call that out on there. I call out when the end of their first day is. For the first week, it's important to have everything on their calendar. For week 2 and beyond, they can manage their own stuff. But for week 1, to set them up for success, I think it's important that you put everything on their calendar.
All right, you really, really split that one down the middle like King Solomon. I love it. Thank you so much for that, Sahar, and for the great conversation overall. So with that said, I'm going to say that's a wrap for today's episode of All On Board. Again, I want to thank you, Sahar, for this insightful and valuable conversation. I hope it's been useful for folks listening in as you're thinking about your own onboarding efforts. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast to stay updated with the latest tips and trends in employee onboarding. And stay tuned, as always, for Thomas's take, where I'll share a thought or two about the conversation we just had. So until next time, keep rolling out those red carpets for your new employees, and have a great day, everyone. Hey all, Thomas here. I'm back with my take on this conversation with Sahar. I had 3 main takeaways from this conversation. First of all, onboarding at the smallest scale. We talked a lot about when you're onboarding employees into a company of, say, 5 employees, it could look very, very different from dozens, hundreds, or thousands. In the early days, onboarding, especially from an HR perspective, is almost strictly about the paperwork. It's all about the compliance layer. The biggest way to add value is likely in getting I-9s done, getting the paperwork done, getting things out of the way administratively so that the rest of the team can work with each other and through each other effectively. Early in the company's life cycle, you're working with people who have all worked together before or know of each other in some capacity. It's all about figuring out the rhythms of working together more so than any kind of structured program. Now, what are some signs that you need to get into some kind of structure for an onboarding program? Well, when you're recruiting heavily outside of your network, when you have folks who are completely different from each other, whether that's because they're working in different locations and not in the same place, or they have not had the same background in terms of the functional skill set that they bring to the table, or they haven't worked in a common company before, or are of different generations. Those are all the signals that will probably get you to the point where you can do more than just getting the paperwork done, getting the laptops purchased, getting everything done on the logistics layer, and actually bring in some investment on the experiential and overall cultural layer of the company. Now, a second piece from this episode that really stood out is this concept of building trust with leadership. An HR leader or a people leader is nothing without having great relationships with the executive team. When you're working with founders in early stage companies, and especially first time founders, that is more important and, generally speaking, more challenging. Often a key question is, how can you win their trust to start putting in some of the programming that you know is something that this company could use and need? For some of the earliest companies out there, sometimes you just don't learn until you fail. So often you think about recruiting first and scaling up before you think about investing in any other part of the employee journey. That is a typical journey that most first-time founders and companies go through as they go from hitting some kind of product market fit and needing to recruit to needing to retain talent. That is a typical journey that most companies go through as they go from finding product market fit to needing to hire and recruit, all the way to figuring out that they need to retain and engage their talent better. So a time of loss, unfortunately, is sometimes the best time to think about how you might need to pause and re-energize your employee lifecycle overall, starting with the employee onboarding program. Right at that moment of losing a key employee 3 to 6 months into their journey, after spending a lot of cash on the recruiting cycle, a lot of time from the leadership team and the HR team, and of course the managers, getting this person up to speed and productive, and then losing the person before they even get to that level of productivity, you know you're at a net loss. The team is staring down the barrel of significant recruiting costs to get someone else to replace that person. Well, that's probably a great time to slow down and think about, with the leadership team, what you could have done differently. Is this unique? Is there something we could do to prevent this next time? And the best way to think about what you might want to change in terms of a process is what you do in the first 30, 60, and 90 days. What could you have done differently there that would have prevented you from getting to this outcome? Is a great question to ask, and could be the beginnings of creating an onboarding program, and also the beginnings of building deeper trust with leadership. A final point I'll make that really stood out to me and is a great reminder from this episode is the idea that you just need to be welcoming. You want to be positive. You want to be that cheerleader for new employees on their first few days. There's just nothing like it when an employee, especially when remote, can feel the positive energy and those vibrations coming from you, the leadership team, and every single thing that you're doing, whether it's in writing through emails or in the way you present your new hire orientation, whatever it is that you do, that energy and that positive energy really is felt. And that ultimately is such a simple thing that you can do to just set up your employees to bring that energy right back to you as they get started. On day one, they're coming in with positive thoughts as they just accepted this amazing offer. So take that to the next level and make sure that you're providing energy. You yourself might not be the most energetic person, but it's important that new employees feel that positive energy. Maybe it's someone on your team that creates those good vibes for employees as they come in. So make sure they're featured. And that is a part of the first few days and weeks of new employees. And maybe that's something that can stick around with them as you evolve throughout their employee life cycle. So that's all I had. Signing off again. This is Thomas with my take.